Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you so much, AMA DC, for inviting me back again. It's wonderful to be back. And welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, this cold and icy evening. It's great to see some familiar faces and names out there, so thank you. And welcome to Bridge the Divide. So today we're going to talk about this separation that has emerged between brands and our audiences and how it makes marketing increasingly difficult and challenging for us. And so I'll start by really talking about what that separation is, what that divide is, why it exists, where it came from, and what we can do to overcome it. So let's dive in. So I don't know how many people saw this ad campaign from Kentucky Fried Chicken. So it featured Mario Lopez as the Colonel, and it was a kind of telenovela-esque, soap opera-like mini movie that was aired on Lifetime. And when it came out, the sort of all my marketing Twitter people that I talked to just exploded with this like huge enthusiasm and excitement over this campaign. They were just like this effusive praise. And it didn't strike me in the same way. So I was curious, why do you like this so much? Why do you think this is such a great ad? And they said, because it does a great job of getting attention. So everyone was saying that. And so it was like, you think it's a good ad because it's a spectacle? Because it attracts attention? That just seems so odd to me because, in my mind, the goal of marketing is to engage people and get them to buy from you. So I kind of started thinking more and more about this and, wondered how did we get to this moment where marketers seem to think that all that matters is attention, where you've got, someone like Gary Vee who is saying, attention is where you need to strike, create, and spend against. It's the only thing that matters. So I wanted to kind of explore this a little more. And it took me back in time to the 19th century. And this idea of an attention economy that we're so obsessed with in the 21st century can be traced back to the 19th century and a guy named Elias St. Elmo Lewis. And he is credited with inventing the marketing funnel. So to me, this is like bizarre, right? We're living in the 21st century and we're using this theory from the 19th century. And it's really why the attention economy exists. So, let's look into that. So the attention economy or the marketing funnel, for Elias, he believed that the only way that companies can sell their products is by attracting enough people with advertisements, and that by sheer kind of mathematical probability, if you have enough people kind of that know about you, inevitably some will buy from you. So it's based on this idea that advertising is the only way to attract people, that attention is the only currency, and that people's buying decisions are something that companies can control in this linear and predictable process. And obviously, we're still using it today. But of course, we all know, as humans in the world who buy things, that this is not how decision-making happens, right? We don't start off at awareness and move through to purchase. Buying decisions are incredibly messy things that start and stop and go backwards and make no sense and are irrational. And something happened recently that really kind of exploded this whole idea of advertising as being a successful way to sell things and the whole notion of the attention economy. And that's an ad fraud that was unmasked by Uber. And this specifically has to deal with programmatic advertising. So it's a huge scandal. Uber spent about $150 million on ads. And the guy that runs their, their kind of controls their ad spend, was looking at the numbers and something didn't look right. And so he just decided to turn some off. He turned off $100 million, 2/3 of their ad buy. And guess what happened? Absolutely nothing. Leads didn't drop. He had the same number of leads. Nothing was different. The programmatic ad agencies were just making up numbers. So all of his leads were coming through organically or by word of mouth. It was a huge scandal. So, and more things like this are being uncovered every day. So clearly the attention economy is broken, but also, as we've known for a long while, it never really worked in the first place because consumers have been rejecting ads nearly as long as marketers have been kind of pushing them out. So, we use ad blocking technology to avoid ads. We use subscription services like Netflix and Hulu to avoid ads. If you're like me and have discovered that the only way that I can watch Law and Order reruns is through cable, that if an ad does pop up, I just leave the room and go grab something to drink or a snack. So while consumers are rejecting ads, what they're doing instead is really embracing this world of infinite media that we live in. So it's not just a matter of, TV, radio, print. The internet now has opened this Pandora's box of possible platforms. And what's crazy is brands thinking that they can compete in this sort of infinite media environment, as though they can still pump out enough communications to get attention at a time when people are scattered across all of these niche communities and this kind of infinite number of platforms. So this chasm is really separated, has really emerged, that separates brands from consumers. So on the one hand, you have brands that are still holding tight to this idea that attention is what drives demand and are still competing for eyeballs. And on the other hand, you have consumers who, instead of looking at media as a place to be sold to, they're looking at media as a place to create, to share, to connect, etc. So what really needs to happen then is a total reimagining of what marketing is. And instead of relying on the marketing funnel and relying on attention as kind of the first step of some predictable process, to rethink what marketing can be. So, in thinking about this a little more and reading theories from other places outside marketing, I was really struck by this idea that no one needs your products, right? And this rang true to me just as a consumer. I don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I make Jeff Bezos more money? What we need help with is making progress. And that's why we buy products and services. So this is a wonderful diagram that a company called Intercom uses with their engineers to remind them what people are really buying. Because I think at brands, we get really tied to our cool technology. If you're, say, a consumer brand or a technology brand, or we get really tied to our special proprietary processes if you're a service company. But really, your customers don't care about that. What they care about is what those things allow them to do, the progress that they allow them to make. And so instead of fighting for attention and trying to force consumers down some artificial funnel, brands need to be a bridge to a better life. They need to be a bridge to help consumers make progress. So one way to think about this is to not market better products or services, but to market better customers. And this is an example that came out early in the pandemic that just, I think, really encapsulates this idea. So this is an IG story from a fashion brand called Tibby. Now, they could have shown kind of a video of models dressed up in their clothes, kind of like a fashion show. But they didn't do that. They started this kind of fashion training. And so they would have these IG lives to kind of talk about their clothes. And they created this whole vocabulary about the style of clothes embodied in the Tibby brand. So for Tibby, the Tibby style is what they've called a creative pragmatist. So these are people who want to appear kind of original, kind of slightly off-centered, creative, a little bit edgy, but also they're pragmatic, right? They still have to take their kids to soccer, go to the grocery store, or go to work. So they want to be comfortable in their clothes. They don't want it to be too fussy. And so all around this creative pragmatist concept, they've developed this whole vocabulary like CMC, chill modern classic, and woofs, without fails. And so you can see they get a little kind of snarky, right? They're like, we are not Florida realtor Barbie. And what's interesting, they're like, there's nothing really wrong with being preppy or looking like Florida realtor Barbie, but that's not us. So if you want to look like that, you need to find another brand. But if you want to be a creative pragmatist, this is how you do it. And what they discovered and kind of what came out kind of weeks upon weeks of this, of them doing these IG Live style sessions and IG stories, and I was kind of following along, is that there was this outpouring from women who clearly did not need more sweaters or pants or dresses. What they really needed was help feeling good in their clothes, help feeling like they're themselves in their clothes, that they weren't wearing a costume. And so that's what Tibby was really selling. It was helping them find their style. And so this is called a job to be done. This is what we should really be focused around. Instead of trying to create personas, we should try to figure out what is the job that customers are trying to hire our product or service to do, and what progress are they trying to make, and what obstacle can we help them overcome to make that progress. So job to be done, I can't take credit for it, unfortunately. It's a theory that's typically used in product development, but it's centered on this idea that people buy things not because they were targeted with an ad that got their attention. They buy things because they are actually hiring products for a job. And so they want to get someplace, they want to make some progress. There's an obstacle that stands in their way. And so they're looking to hire a product or service to overcome that obstacle and help them get to a better place. So part of this understanding of job to be done is thinking about what moves someone from their current solution to a new solution. Under what conditions do they start looking for new solutions and hiring different products and services for these jobs? And so instead of thinking about funnels and trying to kind of attract a bunch of people in the hope that they will ultimately buy from you, we have to think about the forces that push people to change and look for a new solution, and those forces that keep people from acting and staying where they are. So first, there are forces that move us towards a new solution. One of them is pushes where whatever solution you're currently using is just, it's not working for you anymore, right? We've all had that kind of experience where something that worked in the past suddenly isn't working and we need to find an alternative. This could be because our values have changed, our circumstances have changed, the environment has changed. There's lots of things that can be at work here. The other is this idea of being pulled toward a new solution. So you're given an image of the future that's better than what you have now, that is attracting you to that new solution. But at the same time, as there are forces moving you to change, they're also forces keeping you in place. And these are actually things that we compete against when we're trying to market to people. So one is inertia, right? Things are great. It's not broke, don't fix it. There's no kind of motivation for me to change. And the other is anxiety or fear. There's a risk in change. What if I buy this new product or service and it's not as good as I think it is? Will it be a good idea? Maybe it's safer if I just stay where I am. So one example of progress-making forces in action is what happened during the pandemic with schools. So before the pandemic, private schools were actually having a hard time attracting new students, either students who are excelling in public school or maybe parochial school, because parents were saying to themselves, public school's good enough. My kids are doing well. They've got a lot of friends. They're doing well in sports, and they've got a lot of extracurricular activities. Private school is really expensive. Is it really going to be that much better? Is it going to be worth the cost if I change? You can kind of see the forces that push and pull and keep someone in place and move them kind of at play. But when the pandemic hit, of course, schools closed. Kids were at home trying to do school remotely. I know firsthand, I have a middle schooler and high schooler who have been at home now with me for almost a year. And that completely changes your priorities. And there are different forces at play now. Now parents are having to help their kids learn while they're working from home, while they're dealing with a pandemic. Now, what had been just fine, public school, was no longer fine because they weren't learning in person anymore. So the risk is now reduced to go to private school, and the cost feels like it is worth it because your kids will get in-person learning. And so what happened? The people applying to private school, families applying to private school, increased to a level that had rarely been seen. And they were, it was such a phenomenon that the Washington Post was writing articles about it. So it was this kind of real life, real time example of how these progress making forces can work on people to get them to make a decision and to choose a new solution. So the other part of the progress making forces and job to be done is that your competitors are no longer product like yours or services like yours in your category. Your competitors are any solution to your customer's job. So totally different things could be competing for the same job. So for example, in my case, here are two things that compete to be hired for my job, which is relaxation. Right? So kind of depending on the different forces at play, I could choose a glass of wine. I could choose this modern needlepoint kit that I've become obsessed with. It really depends on the different factors at work. So we talked about job to be done and how people make decisions to change, not because an ad has caught their attention, but because they're trying to make progress, and how there are these forces that push and pull and keep people in place and encourage them to change. And the third sort of part of Bridge Brands is this idea of marketing to the moment. So whereas advertisements and kind of traditionally marketing is based on this idea of just flooding the channels with communications and messages and interrupting experiences, marketing to the moment are brands that are really savvy about the context in which their communications and interactions with consumers are occurring, and they're showing up in a way that is authentic and welcome. And so again, Tibi is such a great example because it's not to one side, you see kind of a more traditional approach to marketing, right? Where you've got this editorial shot of these kind of normatively beautiful models lounging around in the clothes. And on the other side, you see a video from one of their IG lives where they're really talking about kind of the rules and the philosophy behind being a creative pragmatist, really teaching people, helping them figure out what works for them so that they can kind of show up in a way that's natural. So this is bridge branding. And I want to just kind of review how it's different from this traditional idea of attention marketing that we've been so mired in. So whereas attention marketing, you're competing for eyeballs, with bridge branding, you're really helping people make progress. And whereas when you're focused on trying to get someone's attention, you really think of consumers as data to be tracked. With bridge branding, you're thinking of consumers as humans that you can talk to and create insights around. So to really understand the progress they're trying to make and the obstacles that stand in their way. Attention marketing is very media centric, whereas bridge branding is very moment centric and contextual. Attention marketing, typically brands are very static and monolithic, right? You have one creative campaign and it just goes out across all the channels. Whereas with bridge branding, brands are evolving and very responsive to change and much more human. In attention marketing, typically kind of the product is developed first and then you market it. But with bridge branding, the customer really drives the customer, and their job to be done really drives the development of everything. Everything is integrated. So one of the jobs to be done, that's one of the most important ones for all of us, is identity, right? And typically, brands that try to help us create identity are very normative. They create they present a very narrow definition of what it means to show up in the world. And only recently has that really begun to change, right? Usually it's a very specific idea of beauty, of what body size is considered beautiful, of what race is considered beautiful, all of those things. So I came across this brand, Uncle Terry Smells, and I clearly had this reaction in very much that I wanted to hire them for the job of my identity. And so let me sort of unpack that. So Uncle Terry Smells, as you can kind of see, is a candle company. And to be perfectly honest, I've never liked candles. I don't get them. I know they're really popular right now. I feel like they're kind of clutter, but I was able to put that aside because I was so drawn to this brand. So the typeface is like this early 90s typeface that I was experimenting with when we suddenly had access to fonts in a way we never had before with personal computers. The colors are kind of not this really nice blue and orange. They're really kind of bright. And then what they do is they use those colors in cultural references that span kind of kitsch to street culture, to high culture, popular culture, all of these different things. And I felt like someone had seen into my soul. Like it perfectly encapsulated kind of how I moved through the world, what I loved, what I responded to. And I just love this brand. And what is fascinating to me too, as someone who does branding, is, they sell candles, but they could sell anything because the brand is really about culture and identity. And they just happen to be selling candles. Because I'm telling you right now, if they sold a dress or if they sold a notebook, I would buy that too, because the brand connects so authentically with me. It's not a brand that's for everyone, clearly, but it's something that instantly reached into me and I identified with. It struck a chord in terms of resonating with the kind of person I see myself as. So I love them so much. I wrote about them on social media, and they actually responded back to me, which never happens. It was super exciting. And full disclosure, they sent me a candle, and I love candles now. I can show you. I have their candles. And the other cool thing about them is they didn't send me some like artisanal box of matches, right? They sent me, of course, a Bic lighter, because that is what, goes with the brand. I just thought it was brilliant, and just a great example of a bridge brand. So how do you use billboards to market to millennials? This to me is just a wonderful example of how, marketing is not about technology or tools, it's about timing. So when the DJ Marshmello was starting out, he was trying to raise awareness of his music. And, his audience are millennials. Your first thought, or my first thought, was, well, of course he would do it through social media. But that's not what he did. He did it through one of the most traditional forms of advertising, which is a billboard. But it was an incredibly savvy use of when the billboard was put up, where it was put up, and what it said. So first, it was put up during Coachella at the exit that you would take to get to the music festival. So obviously, his audience are the people who would be, going to the festival goers. So that is, spot on. And then he used a message that would only be legible to the audience he was trying to reach. So, I look at this and I have no idea what this thing means. I don't know what detox tea is. I don't know why you would have to sell it. None of those things. I literally had to Google it to understand what was going on. But I'm not his audience. The festival goers knew exactly what he was talking about because they had been sharing memes and discussion around detox tea at the time. This is obviously several years old. And so instantly when they saw this billboard, they got online trying to figure out who Marshmello Music was. So I just think this is a beautiful, really wonderful example of marketing in the moment and being kind of channel agnostic, right? The point is you want to reach people in a way that's contextual, that's natural in the moment. It's not about kind of having the latest technology. Another example of marketing to the moment and really kind of thinking about job to be done is this collaboration between Barilla and Spotify. So one thing I love about this, these are the kinds of collaborations that when I gave my trends talk a few years ago, I called brand besties. So brands who come together to be able to reach audiences in a way that they could never do separately. So what Barilla has done is work with Spotify to create playlists that are exactly the length of time that it takes to cook certain pasta. So there's Moody Day Linguine, there's Boom Back Fusilli, there's Top Hit Spaghetti, and depending on what you're cooking, you can choose the playlist. And what I love about this is that, these are brands that are thinking of the role that music or pasta can play in our lives and how they could play together, right? So I've been making a lot more pasta during the pandemic than I ever have before because comfort food. And just that waiting time around the water boiling and cooking the pasta and waiting for it to be ready and sort of imagining that this is a job to be done that is totally ignored. No one ever thinks about like, what do people need while they're cooking or while they're waiting for something to be ready? So creating this thing that's neither kind of product or marketing, or maybe it's a little bit of both, I thought is just kind of a lovely collaboration that really looks at the experience from the customer's point of view and tries to give them something that is helpful and valuable as they're interacting with those products. So I talked a little bit earlier about identity and how, as a job to be done, it's something that's usually been kind of shut down by brands rather than opened up. And Faculty is a men's grooming brand that does exactly that, that embraces diversity. So they are founded on the belief that you can be any kind of man that you want. There's no one way to be a man. And so that embracing of diversity and inclusion is reflected in their visual identity. So unlike most brands who kind of have a very monolithic look that's really built around consistency, they use these very expressive F fonts to kind of articulate difference and show different sides of the brand. And then they're paired with images of men that come in, that are of different ethnicities, different races. One thing I will say around kind of the job to be done around identity, whereas you're seeing more and more brands helping people who have different body shapes, who are of different races or different ethnicities, kind of embrace their own identity. One area of difference that you're not seeing so much are kind of a range of ages. So that's also something to keep in mind when you think about job to be done, is if you're trying to create an inclusive brand, and if you think that's the progress someone is trying to make, that it's important to really think big around that issue. So how do you launch a tourism campaign during the pandemic, right? It would seem absurd because we're not going anywhere. Well, Iceland had a wonderful solution. And unlike a traditional marketing campaign around tourism, that would be all about kind of showcasing what you can do there and those sorts of things, they really looked at it from our perspective, from the people's perspective who are stuck at home, right? We are all so frustrated that at times we even scream about it. I was actually listening to a story on NPR where there was a bunch of moms who would have these kind of screaming circles, these cathartic screaming circles where they would go outside and just yell. And so Iceland really tapped into that. And what they did was they said, we have this beautiful, open, vast landscape. We know you're like trapped in your house. Why don't you pick a landscape that you love, record your scream, and we will play it on a speaker in that landscape. So on this website, you can kind of go through and pick a landscape and listen to the scream, or you can record a scream. And again, this is just such a wonderful example of a brand that kind of bridges that divide between it and customers by understanding their situation, what's going on with them, what they need in that moment, and how the brand can help them make progress in a way that's really kind of fun and delightful. I mentioned earlier about infinite media and how it's ludicrous to think that you can compete for attention. Well, one way that you can succeed in infinite media is an approach similar to what Billie Eilish and her team have done. So her song Bad Guy was a big hit, and there were tons of people who did their own versions of the song and posted them on social media. So it could be a classical music version, it could be a country version, it could be a dance interpretation, all different kinds. So she used AI technology to pull all of these covers into a single experience on YouTube where you could go through and watch them. You could filter them for certain kinds of versions. So say like all the classical versions. And I thought that this was just such a wonderful way to engage in infinite media, because she really recognized that, brands are nothing without their audience. And it doesn't matter if you're a rock star or if you're selling socks, right? You still need someone to engage with you and buy from you. And so she's really celebrating that creation of brands. I think one of the big things that we're seeing, and what makes marketing so challenging today, if you're trying to compete for attention, is that now people are creating more content than brands do at all. So the question is why would anyone pay attention to a brand's content? There's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to compete. So why try? Why not embrace this creator culture and really raise up the voices of your community? And so I think this is just a great example of that kind of thinking in the moment and elevating your audience as opposed to trying to compete for attention. This is a more traditional example of advertising during the pandemic, but I wanted to include it because of the way that this campaign kind of reorients the attention away from brands and toward us. So, I'm sure you remember at the beginning when we were all in lockdown, we heard advertising after advertising about these uncertain times and how brands are with us, et cetera, et cetera. And it became so absurd that someone actually created a kind of collage of all the advertisements to show how undifferentiated they all were. So this is a campaign similar to those where, the brand has done some social good project, but instead of kind of patting them on themselves on the back and telling us how great they are and how much they'll be there for us, Capri Sun says two simple words: I'm sorry. They say, I'm sorry to kids for losing school time and not being able to hang out with your friends or, play soccer outside, or, that you're having to wear masks when typically you're only having to do that at Halloween. It really, again, like some of these other examples, it's a reorientation and appreciation of what their audience is going through in a very human and authentic way to signal, we understand that you're having a hard time. We don't want to make it any harder. And it's then that they go in to explain that they're replacing the juice in their pouches with water because kids in school can't use the public water fountains anymore because of health issues. And so they kind of, at the bottom of their print campaign, they say, and you're welcome, parents, because of course, parents are thrilled that the pouches now have water instead of the sugar drink that they had before. So again, a kind of reorientation, thinking about what people are going through, not trying to push their agenda, but in messaging, if in no other way, kind of acknowledge where people are coming from. When we think about the forces that inhibit or promote progress, I think convenience is a huge one, right? There's nothing easier than buying something on Amazon. I think it takes me 2 clicks to have something in my basket and for it to arrive at my doorstep the next day. So the American Association of Independent Booksellers is, clearly struggling. And there's been a big push to get people to shop at independent bookstores. And so for Amazon Prime Day, they did this big campaign where they wrapped stores, and this is Solid State Books in DC, with messages designed to combat that force towards convenience and really showing people the impact of that convenience. And that, instead of shopping from someone who is a $1 trillion company that is kind of creating this dystopian world, shop from somebody who really loves books, who, is just there for the love of books. I love that they say, this idea of created by real people, not a creepy algorithm. So really kind of showing the humanity behind the store and kind of positioning Amazon as this kind of dystopian, unhuman, unfeeling place. So again, I think it's a wonderful way of kind of in the moment, creating an impression through messaging and reorienting how forces can work on us. This is another example, I think, of a brand that's doing a great job within Infinite Media. There was a picture that surfaced online of Harry Styles, this picture, in fact, wearing this sweater at a rehearsal for a concert he was going to be given, and it just exploded. So what ended up happening were people loved the sweater so much, they started knitting it themselves. Well, in fact, this sweater is made by J.W. Anderson, somewhat of a couture fashion brand, and it costs $1,600. So it's not like people were going to run out and buy the sweater. Typically, when this happens to brands, especially fashion brands, right, they lock down tight. They keep a really tight chain on copies. And so you could have imagined that J.W. Anderson would try to stop this or be upset by this, but instead they embraced it. They embraced the creator culture, and they actually published the pattern for the sweater online so that anyone could make it. So instead of trying to compete for attention amongst lots of other different kinds of content, J.W. Anderson recognized, oh, there is this community around Harry Styles that is loving our sweater. Why don't we help them love it even more? Why don't we make it even easier for them to create their own sweater? So I think just a great example of understanding and being really sensitive and attuned to kind of what's happening in the moment, the way that fandoms work, how to engage with people based on the way that they want to be communicated with, and not kind of fighting what's happening, not fighting that creator culture, but actually participating in it and making a space for it. And this last example is one that I actually ran across just 2 days ago, and I just thought it was so brilliant. So we were ordering a pizza, as all of us I'm sure have done many times in the last year. And we usually order from Manny and Olga's, which is a local DC chain. And instead of the pizza coming in the Manny and Olga's branded box, it came in this box. So it looks like kind of a page from a coloring book. And, you know, I quickly realized that it was promoting this new movie that Kristen Wiig is starring in, Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. And it had a QR code, so I could take a picture and then instantly see how I could stream the movie. There's a hashtag. And it's just such a great example of marking to the moment, meeting people where they are, and giving them what they need in that moment. So, you know, what goes better with pizza than a movie? So, you know, helping us in that desire to, what are we going to watch? This is great. Coloring has exploded. We all love to do that. And so providing something that we could actually interact with and color in. I shared this actually with a client today. And she's like, oh my God, I would color this in a second, you know, which is, I think, just phenomenal. So I thought this was just a brilliant way of, you know, it's not about kind of flooding our inboxes or the social channels we're on with kind of advertising that interrupts our experience, but it's creating something that can be part of our experience in a way that is welcome and helpful to what we're trying to do in that moment. So I hope that you've inspired to rethink about your commitment to the marketing funnel and our collective obsession with the attention economy, and instead to be a bridge to help market better customers by understanding what the job it is they're trying to do and the forces that work on them to make decisions around that job, and to market in the moment, to really show up in a way that doesn't interrupt what someone's trying to do, but can complement that moment and help them with that job. So thank you so much. It was so wonderful to kind of share this new approach with you. And if you're interested in learning more, please follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I am also poking around on Clubhouse if you're there. And if you have specific questions, you can reach me at my personal email here. If there's anything I can do to help you or be of service in any way, please reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leigh. I love how you give so many examples, and the examples are just so on point and so cool. I loved it. I want to open it up. Let's open it up to questions, or if anyone has any comments, feel free to put them into the chat box, or you can come on and just ask those questions.
Hi, this is Angela. I have a quick question for Leigh. In regards to the funnel, has it ever been like useful? Like way back when, I think times were a little bit simpler than now. I mean, did it serve a purpose, or was it just never, it was just more of a model that?
Well, I mean, I guess the short answer is I don't know. I haven't kind of dug into that history, but I have to imagine if we've been using it for over 100 years, it served some purpose at some time. So I'm kind of shocked that we're still using it. I think, you know, when it was invented, all anyone really had was advertisements. I mean, so they had to kind of figure out, how do we connect us, ourselves, our brands, our products, our services to people? And so I think that they viewed advertising as a way to do that. And so the funnel was sort of built around the model of advertising. But I think as media has become more complex, it's clear that it doesn't, it's not this set it and forget it kind of theory.
Thanks. It is kind of strange that it's still actively used.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I will say too, the thing, as I was looking at it, I was like, why do we love this so much? And I think because it reflects us back to us, right? The funnel has nothing to do with our customer. It has to do with us, right? When do people find out about us? When do they ask for more information about us? When do they buy from us? And I think it gives us an illusion of control that we don't have, but it makes us feel good because we feel like we're in control. So I think that may be part of it too.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Thank you.
So interesting.
Thank you for your question.
Natalie has a question. Any tips for nonprofits that don't have a ton of engagement on social?
That's a very big question. I think, you know, I'm a big believer that it's not, that good marketing does not require huge budgets, because really, to me, it's about creativity. If I look at any of these examples, it wasn't, I don't think they are effective or you know, connect because they threw tons of money at a problem. I think that they are effective because they understood their audience and crafted an experience around that. So I think the first thing I would recommend is really understanding who your audiences are and what they care about. I think with nonprofits, right, you may not be selling a product or service, but in essence, you're kind of trying to get people to buy into a cause. And so you have to get a better sense of, how does your cause relate to what's important to your audience? What's the job they're trying to do, perhaps around that cause? You know, how can you connect with that? And then show how you're relevant to the progress that they want to make. And then build experiences around that. So to me, it's more about, you know, really understanding your audiences deeply and what they're trying to do, where they're trying to get to, and then how can you create experiences that intersect with that. In the same, like Tibby to me is a great example. I think, you know, any of us could do something like that just with a smartphone, because that's basically, I think they maybe used an iPad, but it's not, you know, it's not super sophisticated. It doesn't require a lot of money. It doesn't require a lot of, you know, sophisticated technology. It's really more about understanding who you're trying to talk to and creating an experience that resonates with them.
Awesome. Alexis has a question. Tips for discussing branding with graphic designers who are non-marketers.
Tips for discussing branding. That's, let's see. I would love more detail about that. What specifically? If there could be more information.
Alexis, are you able to share any more details?
Hard to know how to answer that.
Yes, hello.
There she is.
So I am currently in a branding battle with my graphic designers on what is branding. And their mind's definition of branding is the same thing repeated. And I'm just, as a social media manager, I'm like, no, it's just not that.
So you're saying that they're looking at it as though consistency is really the most important thing.
Yes, oh, go ahead.
Oh, just the kind of the same look and feel across everything.
Not even the same look and feel. It's literally the same thing over and over again.
Wow. Okay. So I think what I would say is really to step back and talk about what your brand is, kind of why you exist, what the purpose of the brand is. And then also look at who the audiences are. So one great example, I think, to show them, as I think about it, is you can use, for example, the Biden campaign. So they had a kind of look that was kind of more traditional, that they would use kind of for a broad mass audience. But if they were talking to certain specific audiences like LGBTQ, they used all of these gradients and they were much more expressive. And I really consider that kind of part of bridge branding, where the brand is less controlling, right? They're more audience centric. They're more saying, you don't have to meet me where I am in this kind of rigid appearance. I'm gonna create a place that's welcome for you, so that depending on the audience, that the Biden campaign brand showed up in a different way. So that some flexibility is okay. It should be guided by your audience and kind of strategically what you're trying to do. So I often think showing examples can be really helpful, because it's, especially with branding, all of this stuff is so abstract that if you can point to specific examples, that can be helpful.
Thank
So
you.
good. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, I had a quick question. This is Angela, because a few years back, I know that disruption was highly touted in the advertising industry, which clearly flies in the face of successful. Clearly the last thing we want to be doing is disrupting. So I'd just like to get your thoughts about what do you think about that? Because it's like intentionally disrupting people when that's the last thing we should be doing.
Right. I'm totally against it. I mean, I think that is kind of what advertising is traditionally based on, is this kind of interruption, right? I'm watching Law and Order and an ad comes on. I didn't ask for that, right? Is that what you're talking about? That kind of interruptive experience?
Exactly. And it was actually like wanted, like they, for some reason, like a lot of these agencies that I was not working with, but I was part of a campaign where that's exactly what they wanted to do, was create disruption in the in a consumer's life. Like isn't that exactly what the opposite of what we're aiming to do, is actually be part of, like, being inclusive and being part of their world?
Yes.
Their mindset. I mean, it was maybe a different time, a different place, but it just seems so odd to be thinking that disruption is totally okay. In fact, it is the thing we want to be doing.
Yeah, I go back to that Kentucky Fried Chicken, Mario Lopez thing, right? Like, it's pure spectacle. All it is designed to do is get attention. And what I noticed, and this also happened, there was a Burger King is also doing this. I call it spectacle marketing, where the whole kind of point is to get attention. So I don't know if y'all remember the Burger King ad with the moldy hamburger. And I just thought, like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But it won tons of awards. And what I realized was ads are not for consumers. They're not intended to get people to buy things. Ads are for advertisers. It's this big kind of like, what is it? Like the dog chasing its tail. It's this kind of insular world of kind of in-jokes and spectacle that's now kind of eating itself. And so I think, I found that when I, talk to people in the ad industry, it's like this, they're in this little bubble. They have no kind of concept of, what's happening on Twitch or what's happening on TikTok or all these other places where these kind of niche communities are being built, and creators are kind of the new brands now. So I think I totally agree with you that interruption does not work. And it's been shown kind of at a programmatic level that it doesn't work. It's also, I think we know from our own personal experience that ads that interrupt what we do not work.
Okay, thank you. That's just making me think a little bit more about it.
Any last questions? And thank you so much to everyone who did submit questions. I'm going to launch a poll really quick just to get your thoughts on the session. We always love hearing from you guys. And also, if you want to provide any notes in the chat of any topics or that you'd like AMADC to focus on in the future, or just any thoughts you have about the session, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And again, I'm going to be sticking around after the session. So if you have any questions on membership or getting involved, feel free to stick around. And Leigh, thank you so much. This was so great. And I will be sending the presentation and the recording out to everybody to their email tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for that.
And I'm going to ask Dr. George one more question.
Yeah.
I just want to know, because I understand you're one of the few doctors of brand. I don't know if that's your exact title, but I'd love to know a little bit more about it and how you came around to become one, because it seems like a sort of a lonely path and one you forged on your own.
Yeah, so happy to talk about that. So my background was really in art history, sort of more traditional art history. And I went to graduate school at SUNY Binghamton, now known as Binghamton University. And my department at the time was not called an art history department. It was called the History and Theory of Visual Culture. So you could study not just fine art, but you could study any sort of visual cultural production. So I had friends who were studying body art, different kinds of film making practices, and I was very interested in graphic design because I felt that art did not have the impact on people's everyday lives in the 20th century, which I was in graduate school in the 20th century, that it used to, right? When you think about earlier centuries where art was really kind of an arm of the state or of the church. And I really felt that it was graphic design, which was now what people use to shape our identities and kind of communicate corporate power and all of these different things. So that's sort of what led me to study graphic design and the professionalization of designers in the early 20th century, and then the rise of corporate identity programs mid-century. And that's sort of what I focused on. And I thought I was going to be an academic. But in the course of being a graduate student and teaching, discovered I didn't want to be in academia for various reasons, that I wanted to actually kind of do the type of work that I had been, of the people who I had been studying. So I left academia and worked in-house briefly and then in agencies. So that was sort of, it's a very non-traditional path. It's not like I went to business school for marketing or anything like that. And I don't know if that's why I can have a more contrarian view of things of these kind of sacred cows that, we kind of take for granted. But I feel like my whole practice is kind of asking myself, why are we using that? Does that still work? Is there a better way? So I think kind of coming at it from that untraditional angle has been helpful.
Well, thank you. That is a really interesting story. But I do think nowadays it is really helpful to have that unique perspective. And if you just take the path that everybody else is taking, then you will have similar views. So, so thank you for that. Appreciate it.
And I'm also happy to hang out a little afterwards too, if people feel more comfortable asking questions later.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming tonight. A big thank you to Leigh for the presentation. So happy to have you all here. And we'll stick around if you want to chat a little bit more.
Do you want to take down the presentation so we can
Yes.
chat?
Perfect.